I work as a line operator out in South Dakota. I live in Wall, which you might know if you've ever driven through the state and see all those wall drug signs. I'm about to go looking for a job there, even though being a line operator pays better. Reason for that is a couple weeks ago, a guy I work with named Tony just disappeared. He was working a line out in Quinn, edge of town there. No one knows what happened to him. They found all his tools and some ripped-up clothes. But that's it. He was just gone. Some people say it was because he caught his wife cheating and he just run off. But then why would he go to all that trouble to tear up his own clothes? And why would he leave his pickup parked next to that utility pole? I didn't believe it then, but I sure don't now. We got two things in South Dakota that shouldn't mix, and that's chemical plants and reptiles. Snakes, lizards, frogs, turtles, salamanders. I don't know what all. I believe what got Tony was a reptilian. I wouldn't believe it, though, if I hadn't seen it myself. When you're working on a line, they tell you not to look around. You gotta focus on the job, for one thing. It's a dangerous job. Guys have been electrocuted. For another, you're up pretty high. We use safety gear, of course, but nothing's foolproof. Most of the time, I follow that rule. I get up there, do what I gotta do, and get back down. But one day, it was hot, and the wind was blowing hard. People who haven't lived in the Great Plains don't really get what that wind is like. Makes you feel like the world's trying to get rid of you. I heard the wind blowing something around, I thought, so I glanced down and there was the ugliest creature I'd ever seen. At first, I thought it had to be a dude in a costume. Someone playing a prank, you know? Thing had like a snake-like head and yellow eyes. It stood up like a person, but instead of hands, it had claws. Thing was taller than a person, too. Like maybe 8 or 9 feet, and that's when it hit me. No way was this a guy in a costume. That's when I got scared. This line was along a rural road. I couldn't see anything around except corn. The snake thing opened its mouth and showed me a bunch of sharp teeth. Now, I know they're trying to say dinosaurs aren't reptiles, like they're really birds or something. But this thing looked prehistoric, like a dinosaur reptile thing. And it wanted to eat me, I was sure. It raised up its hand claws and I nearly let go of the pole. If I had, the safety harness would have held me, but still. I had to fix that line, so I focused on it. I told myself that when I was done, it would be gone. It wasn't going to wait down there forever. I finished repairing that wire that had snapped off and looked down again. The dino thing was still there. It was broad daylight and that thing was just standing there like it didn't care about nothing. Like it owned the plains. I remembered Tony then. Because that had happened a week before and I'd gone out there to where they'd found him. It wasn't this road, but it wasn't far, maybe a half-mile down. By the time I got there, they'd taken his clothes and stuff. I'd gotten close to the ground and looked around. There were dark drops in the dirt. Could have been blood, I wasn't sure. I also saw some tracks. I didn't think of it much at the time, but as I was clinging to that pole, looking down at this dino thing, I knew it made those tracks. They looked like the tracks lizards make, 5 long toes with claws on the end. Creepy, now that I knew what they were. It was hot, but I felt freezing cold. I didn't know what to do. Did I have to stay up there until the thing went away? I thought if a car went by, maybe it would. But I'd worked on this line before and been hours without seeing anyone pass. There was a farmhouse off in the distance, way too far away. The dino thing bared its teeth at me again in a grin, and I swear there was blood in those teeth. Suddenly, I wondered if I was hallucinating. Maybe the thing wasn't even there at all. Maybe I was just imagining it. I closed my eyes and told myself that when I opened them, it'd be gone. You know, like when you see water down the road, but it's just a mirage? It was still there when I opened them. Reptiles can stay still for a long time, like snakes. I seen them sitting on a rock for hours, just soaking up sun. I couldn't outlast it. I came up with a plan. I'd call someone and get them to come. Either the thing would leave or we'd fight it off together. There was only one person who would come out there for me, Carl. Carl had nothing better to do. He lived down at the trailer park and had no job most of the time. I got out my phone and tried not to sound scared, spitless. "Hey, Carl, my truck died. Want to come out here and pick me up?" I hated lying, but it didn't matter right now. I was up a creek, you know? Those 10 minutes until he came seemed like forever. That dino thing didn't stop grinning, like it knew I couldn't stay up there forever. I heard the truck, tires on the pavement like the best thing you ever heard in your life. I looked for it, strained my eyes down the road. When I looked back, the dino thing was gone. I climbed down the pole and I couldn't feel my legs. When I got to the ground, I fell on my butt. Carl must have thought I was nuts when he found me there in the grass, but he didn't say nothing. I haven't seen that thing since. I hope I never see it again. My name is Charlie, and I'm 66 years old, and I've been a truck driver for 43 years. My wife of 45 years, Ellen, has been trying to convince me to retire since I turned 60, but I wanted to get a few more years in before settling down to a solitary lifestyle. This last trip to Utah, though, has done me in. I was heading down I-15 through the Salt Lake Valley, and it was getting late. I could feel myself close to dozing off, so I decided to find a place to park and bed down for the night. Typically, I try to find a well-lit truck stop parking lot to bed town in, especially since I'm getting up in years and not as able to fight for myself as I was in my prime. That night, though, I thought I would find a quiet rest stop somewhere between towns. There are few things in this world more beautiful than the unobstructed Utah night sky, and I wanted to be able to stargaze a little before I fell asleep. I was able to find a good place to stop, then suddenly remembered I hadn't eaten in a while. I pulled a half a leftover sub sandwich and a soda out of my cooler, I know, dinner of champions, and decided to get something in my stomach before I laid down. Since it was a clear night, I left the truck to stretch my legs out and found a picnic table to sit at while I ate and watched the stars. I figured there must have been a heavy rain earlier in the day. The whole place smelled muddy and wet, although the picnic table was bone dry. In hindsight, I guess that was pretty strange, but it didn't really faze me at the time. As I was eating my sandwich, I looked up and noticed what appeared to be 5 lights in a row traveling together through the sky. I figured it must be an aircraft of some kind, but I'd never seen one quite like it before. I sat watching the aircraft move through the sky for a moment. Then something truly bizarre started happening. The lights began to separate, spinning around each other in circular motion as one moved toward the center of the circle and changed to a deep teal-blue color. Then, all at once, every light around me went out. Why I say every light, I mean every light. The security lamps in the parking lot, the parking lights on my truck, even the stars. I was sitting in complete and total darkness. Have you ever heard a voice in your head? Like when you're remembering something someone told you or even talking to yourself. You know that inner voice that narrates our everyday thoughts? I've heard that some people don't hear that at all, but I think the majority of us know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, that voice in my head was suddenly hijacked by something else. All at once, I heard my own voice in my mind saying, "Charlie, don't be afraid. This won't take long." Of course, my initial response was to feel a bit of a panic. I started to stand up to run back to my truck, and that's when I first realized that I couldn't move. "Be calm, Charlie," the voice said again. And then it was as if I'd been injected with some kind of drug. My whole being just relaxed. I felt like I was floating on a cloud. I'm not sure how much time passed like that. It didn't feel like long, but out of nowhere I was staring into a bright white light and heard what sounded like whispering all around me. It wasn't at all unnerving. It felt almost like being surrounded by loving family. There is no other way to describe the warmth and comfort I felt in that moment. When I should have been petrified out of my gourd, I was soaking up the moment and hoping it would never end. All at once, though, the light released me, and I found myself alone sitting at the picnic table, sandwich still in hand, looking up at the sky. It was as if all that time had simply been erased, and I was right back in the very position I started in. Only now, I couldn't smell the mud. I made my way back to my truck and decided I'd had enough of the great wide open. I was going to drive myself to the next town and camp out in better-lit truck stop parking lot. As I drove, though, I noticed that red light zipping toward me from the sky. At first, it seemed to be standing still. Then it seemed to grow, and I realized it was actually coming closer. I wondered if it was intent on colliding with me, so I took the next exit off the interstate and changed course. I'd have to backtrack in the morning, I figured, but it would be worth it to not get hit by an intergalactic fireball. When I finally found a truck stop and parked, I didn't expect to fall asleep as quickly as I did, but it was as if I'd been put under anesthesia as soon as my head hit the pillow. I dreamed all night about short, skinny, gray-skinned people with large, bulbous black eyes set in the middle of oversized, egg-shaped heads. They had no mouth or nostrils, but they were standing all around me in a circle as I sat frozen on that picnic table. And they were whispering. When I woke up the next morning, I decided to drop my trailer at the next scheduled stop and buy a bus ticket home. I still haven't told Ellen what exactly happened to send me running back into her arms for good, and I don't think I ever will. I have noticed that row of 5 lights circling our house at least a few times a week, though. It's usually accompanied by the voice, reminding me to stay calm. Back in the day, me and my friends used to think it was entertaining to go out late at night and shoot at raccoons. I'm not proud of it now, but it was just what we did back then. It was part of the culture to just blast any undesirable critter. I grew up in the South in Arkansas, and raccoons were considered really big pests. I mean, they got into everything. The garden, the trash. We even had them try to come in through the screen of our kitchen window. Nobody would judge us for going out and shooting them. I'm a lot more considerate of animals now. If I even try to tell this story to my spouse, I just get shut down as a barbaric fool. So I figured I would tell you what we went up against this one night. I've never really had a chance to talk about this outside of those friends who were with me. We know what we saw, but sometimes we even start to question our own eyes. It was probably around October back in maybe 2003 or so. We were fooling around, having some beers and whatnot, and we decided to go coon hunting. Mostly, we were just bored and didn't feel like going to bed yet. It was close to midnight and my parents were asleep. We started out like always down this trail behind my house. We went down this steep section full of sweet shrub toward this gully where we knew some ground burrows were. There were a lot of raccoons that lived down there. It wasn't too far from my house. There was a shallow stream down there where we would see them drinking sometimes. We crossed over the stream and started walking up the hill. There was this good spot with a lot of big stones where we could kind of hide out. We settled in there and took cover and scoped out the area. I had my shotgun across my knees. My friends didn't have theirs since we hadn't really planned this. We sat there trying to keep quiet. We were a little drunk, so we kept bursting out laughing over nothing. We watched for any movement, but we didn't see anything at all. It actually seemed extra quiet that night. No crickets or anything. It started getting pretty cold, and we weren't exactly dressed for the weather. After about an hour of that, we decided we should give up and head back. I had this field spotlight with a hunting lens, and I thought I would take another look before we called it a night. I turned it on, and we saw something about 20 feet away. It was on all fours with its nose to the ground. We couldn't tell if it was eating something or what. It sure wasn't any raccoon. The spotlight coming on didn't even seem to faze it at all, but it sure made it look toward us. That's when things got scary. It took a step toward us and lifted up onto 2 legs. It started growling this really low, guttural growl. It stretched itself up and puffed out its chest. It had a really thick coat of fur around its neck. To me, it looked like it was about 6 or 7 feet tall, and the claws on that thing were like 2 inches long. It bared its teeth, and it reminded me of my friend's Doberman Pinscher when it used to corner something. It even smelled like a really dirty, wet dog. We were all just staring at it, completely petrified. For a minute, it felt like a standoff. It took another step toward us, and I had my shotgun leveled. I fired a shot that hit it in the right side of its ribs. Usually hitting something that close with a .12 gauge shotgun would cause a big hole, and your typical animal wouldn't walk away from it. A spray of blood burst out of that creature, and it let out a loud yelp. But the shot did not knock it down. We were shocked that it just started sprinting away and ran out of my circle of light. My friends were freaking out and yelling at me to shoot it again. I fired 2 more times at it, but it was so fast it got out of my range real quick and I missed. We got up and started following in the direction it ran. I mean, talk about fools. It's hard to believe how stupid we were when we were that young. We went for about 10 feet and found a large pool of blood. Then we went a little further and found a smaller pool of blood. We kept going and spotted footprints that we could follow. We eventually stopped and looked at each other and realized how stupid we were being. Plus, we didn't know if this thing traveled in packs or what. Who knows how many of them there could have been if they hunted in packs. The way it looked, we were thinking we had encountered a real-life werewolf. We started imagining that thing laying low for us and watching us, getting ready for its revenge. We were really scared by then and started heading mostly in the direction of my house. But every little sound would freak us out and we would take cover wherever we could. It took us a long time to make it all the way back to my house since we were convinced that thing was watching us. We made it back and went to bed and really never mentioned it to anybody. Like I said, I've tried to tell my spouse, but I just start feeling like a fool. I'm hoping that someone else hearing this will know what I'm talking about. It's so weird to have an experience like that and know that most people will just think you're crazy.